YouTube and check if everything if you can see the content of the screen. So I'll just copy this and then paste it in the chat. So let me know if you can find it on YouTube, and if you can find it on YouTube, let me know how it looks, because it seems like I'm getting it's kind of just cropping out something, so I want to be sure that everything is fine. Okay, I think I need to do this. So have you guys seen the YouTube link? So just check the chat for the YouTube link and let's see how that is. Hello? Okay. Is it showing?
This is true.
Okay, I think what we need to do at this point is I just want to I want to just switch screens. Okay, so that's fine. Sorry about this. I just need to kind of tidy and make everything look tidy, so we can continue from there. So okay, so basically we are going to be starting from here. So first of all, for you to write HTML, you have to have a file, and then for you to have a file, you have to be able to the file has to live on your computer. So that's what we are going to be doing at this point in time. So we'll just start out from there, then we go up to wherever we want to go to from that particular point. Yeah, so I'll just like I said, if you HTML is the building block for every web page you find on the internet, and the building block for HTML are HTML tags. And I said HTML tags are made up of a couple of component parts. We normally have the opening tag, then we have the closing tag. Then the opening tag normally contains the tag name as well as some other HTML attributes. And I said those attributes are basically characteristics of the HTML elements. And I'm just going to bring back that slide where I showed you the anatomy of an HTML tag. So that's going to be this particular, what's it called, slide. I'll just kind of bring up the slide from the first class and then run through it as fast as possible. Yeah, so basically this is going to be one of those very expensive classes, but it's fine. So here is the slide. So let's just go over the slide in a moment, and let me cancel this. So first of all, you are going to need a laptop, or a desktop computer. You are going to need a web browser. You are going to need a text editor. And you see what I mean by text editor. I'm sure that you are all familiar with the browser, and you all know what a laptop or a desktop computer is. So I'm just going to go over to the next slide. Welcome to HTML. We are going to go over getting started with HTML, basics of HTML documents, and that's what the slide is all about. So HTML basically stands for hypertext markup language, and I'm sure that many of you at one point or the other have done something with WhatsApp before. Maybe while you're using WhatsApp, you were able to you were able to, kind of make text bold while you are sending a message to your friends, or add some kind of format into your text. So HTML is no different from that syntax you're actually using to add, markup to a text you are trying to send to your friends or to anyone, maybe to a boss at work or someone. Just where you format your text. Maybe, for instance, if you want to, make a text bold, you put this syntax, and I'm just going to type it in the chat. You do something like this, and this will be a bold text, basically. If you want to make a text italics, and I'm talking about WhatsApp now, this is going to italicize, a text, and so on like that. So what you are doing here is you are actually writing, markdown, for WhatsApp. But HTML is a markup language. That one you're using on WhatsApp is a markdown language, and I don't want to go into that. But the idea of markup is actually creating, an annotation on text components in a document. And the idea for those annotations is so that whoever will be reading those annotations will be able to know what you mean when you use those annotations. For instance, imagine yourself the author of a book, and you are sending out your book, you are sending out your book for review so that people can actually give you feedback on your work. So as you send out the book, people actually take a look at the book, and they just kind of, at some point might put some kind of signs on the document for you. Okay, maybe like at this point, maybe you should rephrase this word, maybe you should italicize this particular line so that it can add emphasis for the reader, and the reader will know that you are trying to make a valid point there. So you could do that in a lot of ways. For instance, when you did geography in secondary school, and I'm sure a lot of us did geography, when we did map reading, every map reading endeavor will have to, be on the basis of some certain keys. And those keys will actually mark special areas of the map. So that while you are, looking at the map as a student or as a teacher, wherever you are, you can with the keys actually tell that, okay, this place is a rail station. This place is supposed to be a bus stop. This place is supposed to be this. So those keys is actually an annotation for the reader to understand that, okay, this part of this map is so thing, means so thing, or contains so and so resources. So that's the idea behind markup in web pages, really. When you create markup, you actually tell the browser that, okay, this is a special kind of text, and with the appropriate markup, the browser knows the appropriate way to deal with those kind of text and syntaxes. I don't know if it makes sense to you guys. So that is HTML in a nutshell. So the more of the markups, the more you can engage the computer to actually begin to, create specific and special effects on specific text that you enter, because everything you'll be writing basically in HTML is going to be text. But what will make your text different from the text you are sending in a chat or the text you are sending in an email is going to be the markup you're using. And for the browser, it recognizes a very special markup language that we refer to as HTML. And if it sees HTML in any document, it is able to interpret the various annotations you put in that HTML document and display a very nice web page based on the annotations you give to the browser to read. And I don't know if that makes sense to any of you, but let's just go fast. It's not going to be maybe a holistic. Sorry, it's not going to be it's not going to be like such an elaborate class where we explain everything down to the slightest detail. But I believe that makes a lot of sense. So just know that you are. I should make my screen wider. Is it not wide enough? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Is the screen wide enough? Can you guys see my screen? Oh,
yes, sir.
I think I'm sharing the wrong screen actually. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, I get what it is. I'm sharing, the workstation as against the slide. So this is the screen I meant to share actually. And for instance, okay, I think it's better now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for instance, how does your computer know, or your device, whatever device, because even our phones are computers, how does your phone know that a particular file is a music file? It is because of the extension of the file and then the content of the file. Because you can't just pick any random file. We all know that music, basically, the most popular music and format most people know about is MP3. And you can't say because you want to trick your device into thinking, a file is a music file, and you might succeed at doing that by adding a .mp3 extension to it. But the downside is that by the time you tell the browser or your device rather that this particular file is an mp3 file, and when the browser sees that file, your computer, I don't know why I keep saying the browser, your device sees that file, it tries to handle it as a text file. Now it will need to go through the content of that file as an audio file rather. It needs to go through the content of that file to validate whether or not it is an audio file. And when it reads the content of the file and it doesn't see an audio file, you probably won't have any sound playing because the content has to match with the format or the extension of the file. So for HTML, we use a .html extension to create the HTML files. And that's not enough. What we are writing inside of the HTML file has to be HTML syntax. If not, the browser won't have an idea what we are talking about or what we are trying to get it to do. And I told the people who attended the first class that most times we make an assumption to make to think or believe that the computer is very smart. The computer is not actually very smart. The computer is as smart as the set of instructions you have given to it to carry out. And if you send to it instructions that are not quite clear, it won't know what to do next. The computer is very fast, but it is not very smart. So what we are leveraging on is in our ability, to actually smartly, write instructions so that the computer will carry out those instructions at the speed that the computer has, naturally, and that will be to our advantage. But the smartness is not the thing with the computer. What is with the computer really is the speed. And that speed is what makes it look very smart. But we have to be able to give it the appropriate instructions. And one of those instructions you get to give to the computer in programming is writing HTML syntax. So when you write the proper HTML syntax, the computer kind of elegantly handles what you are sending to it to, and the instructions you are sending to it to carry out. So instructions are the most important things in computer programming. So let's go on. HTML is a document, and HTML is also can be seen as a web page. Yeah. So when you are writing HTML, it is a document to you, and when HTML gets to the browser, it becomes a web page. Hold on, guys, for a moment. The gen is not on. If it is, no, is that red light on on that thing we used to change? It's not on. It's not on. If it's on, the AC will be on. Whether that thing is down or is this our inverter thing not on NEPA? It's not on. Tell him it's not on. It is not on. If it is on, the AC will be on. Just go, you are distracting me. Okay, guys, so I said HTML can be seen as a file while you're writing it, but the idea is to give it to the browser so the browser can interpret, the file as, a web page, which is your ultimate goal. That's what you really want to do. You want to be building web pages. You are not trying to just write random files to feel cool about the files you are writing. You are trying to create a web page. So I'll just and this is the idea of HTML document. HTML document will be wrapped inside one root HTML tag, and this is what an HTML tag looks like. This syntax here: use an angle bracket, write the tag name inside of it, then close the angle bracket. That's a standard HTML tag. And the building block for HTML documents are HTML tags. So when you want to create an HTML web page, you write an HTML document using HTML tags, and that will create the final output in your web page. So this is the anatomy. You have an angle bracket, the tag name, the HTML content, and then the tag name. And I won't go over all of these things. So, like trying to go deep into them. So we have more than 100 HTML tags, and that means you shouldn't try to memorize them, because trying to memorize them actually means you will be trying to cram more than 100 tags, and which you don't really need to cram more than 100 tags, because if you are trying to cram more than 100 tags, it means you are going to spend a lot of time trying to memorize them and know what each one of them does. But the idea is really for you to know what they do, and you don't have to memorize them. And as you start developing web pages, you will come to a point where you need to add maybe a video file on your HTML document. And the best friend of every developer is actually the search engine, and the most popular one is Google. So just go to Google and say things like, how do I add a video to my HTML document, and you will see that you will actually see responses. And because you are not the first person to ask that question, there have been several instances where people ask that very same question and you get answers to that. So you don't have to memorize 100 HTML tags or more than 100 HTML tags, because if you combine HTML1, HTML2, 3.24 and 5 together, there are different tags. Some of them are redundant, some of them have been replaced by newer and better ones. So you don't have to memorize all of the tags, but just know that the building block for every HTML document are the HTML tags. And the building block for HTML tags is for you to actually understand the HTML syntax, that you will have to have an opening HTML tag and a closing HTML tag. And the difference between the opening HTML tag and the closing HTML tag is just this slash sign here. And I don't know if anybody's actually following that up. So just have an opening tag with the tag name inside of it. And the way you know a tag is just by this angle bracket that surrounds the tag name. And the tag name could be maybe a paragraph, it could be a span, it could be a header, it could be whatever, but it really doesn't matter. Just know that you have to have those, that opening part and the closing part. And this is just the basic thing, because there's a lot more to this than what I just said. So more than 100 tags, beware of memorization. Don't try to memorize all of the 100 tags, but try to ensure that as a developer, you know how to solve problems by just harnessing the questions that people have already asked and the answers that has already been given to them. Then that's it. So let's just do away with the slide we are currently trying to write. So now we are going to create our first HTML document, and here's how we are going to do that. So this is the class we've been I'll just create a new folder to save us the confusion. So I'll create a new folder and I'll call that folder makeup class, and you can see my screen. Is it makeup or makeup like this? Well, I'll press and I'm just creating the file. So it is blank. There's nothing in it. When I open it, you see that it's actually a blank folder, rather, not a file. It's a blank folder with nothing inside of it at all. So what we are going to do is we need to be able to write HTML, and the idea here is we have to be able to write HTML in such a way that we have to first create the HTML file. And when we create the HTML file, that's when we can start talking about writing HTML, pages or document, as the case may be. So I'm just going to bring up this my text editor. I could have used any other text editor, but and the one I want to use now is Visual Studio Code, and you can download Visual Studio Code on your laptops as well. So when I open Visual Studio Code, I'm going to try to open this makeup class folder that I created already. So here's my Visual Studio Code. This is what it looks like, really. And then my Visual Studio Code, I'm just going to close what I started doing with the other class. I'm going to close each and everything here. And then closing that, I'm going to go to File and I'm going to go to Open. And I want to open this folder I created. So when I click on Open, I will just look for my desktop. I'm looking for my desktop. I select this makeup file, makeup class, folder. And that's it. I open it in my Visual Studio Code. Now when I go here, and this text editor is not where I should really have started for. I just want to start it because this is not like the HTML class. I'm just trying to bring you guys up to speed. So this is the folder I open here. You can see that the folder name is the exact same folder name we have here, makeup class, which is this folder. And you can create your folder anywhere. Just make sure you know where to find it when you want to find it in your Visual Studio Code. And I'm just going to go over how to open it again. Go to File, go to Open, and look for that folder on your computer, because you get your file explorer here. So find the folder on your own computer. On my own computer, it's on my desktop. So I'll just open this, and the way to create files in Visual Studio Code is by just clicking on this first icon beside the folder name, and I click on it, and I'm just going to give it a name, and I'm going to call it home page.html, and you can call it whatever name you want, and I'll press enter. And once I do that, it's going to create that file. You can see that the file extension automatically changed for me. So, and I set the HTML file should have a .html file extension. So imagine me giving this file a .mp3 extension, and watch what is going to happen to the file icon. If I say .mp3, you see that the computer actually changes this icon to a speaker icon, that is, it now expects that it's going to be an audio file, but we are not writing an audio file. So the extension is very important, but the extension we are using here is the HTML extension, and the HTML extension is actually valid, but the standard one is to write the full HTML. So we are going to press enter, and once I do this, I'm going to just write, okay, let me open the browser, because this is HTML as a document. We have to be able to read HTML as a web page. And you can see that this folder now has that file inside of it. Initially it was blank, but now we have the file inside it. So I will right click on this and do open with my Chrome browser. Or let me open it with my Brave browser. And that's what I'll do now. And I'll close this. Then it has opened it with my Brave browser, which is this homepage of HTML. And let me just remove every other thing I have here on the Brave browser. So this is the web page. It doesn't look so much like a web page, but that's basically a web page that we just created using HTML. And let me just reduce the window a little bit so that we can start working on a couple of things. So this is the web page, and then you can see that there's nothing in it, but I've created a web page, and I just want to and disable the autosave feature. Okay, it's already disabled. So now I'm just going to do something like hello from homepage .html, and when I save this and I reload this, you are going to see that text I wrote. Yeah, so someone can now say, okay, since I can actually write text content inside my HTML and my browser will pick it up, then why do I have to go through the hassle of trying to learn HTML tags if I can just write inside my HTML and say, okay, I want to make a web page, and save it, and when I come to the browser and reload, it kind of sees everything I type in. Now that works, but you can see that what I just have here is basic text content, and there's no way for me to really tell the browser that, okay, I want to make this text bold, or I want this text to be a header, I want it to be a paragraph. And that is where the HTML tags come in. So the HTML tags come in to just help the browser read the file, watch out for the syntax and the annotations you make with the HTML tags, and display whatever you have given to the HTML tags to, whatever tags you've added to your HTML document, to display them, appropriate in the browser. So now let's start talking about HTML tags. So the first HTML tag I want to talk about, and we talked about a couple of them, is just the H1 tag, and I won't talk about a lot of tags. So the H1 tag is like the heading class tag, and I'm just going to type a hello with the H1 tag, and I'm going to reload. I can see that my browser actually sees that, wow, like it kind of displays that text differently. So right now I've been able to tell my browser using this HTML syntax, which is this header tag, which is the header tag one. I've been able to tell my browser that this hello text, I want it to be a header text, and the browser automatically makes it bold and big for me. You get the point? So that's the idea behind HTML tag and syntaxes. So there are lots of different HTML tags. For instance, the header tags actually have up to H1, we have H2, and the H2 I can type hello, and you can see that by default the H2 actually becomes smaller than the H1 in size. And then we also have H3, and the H3 becomes smaller than the H2, but the H, just like that. And we have 6 header classes. So we have from H1 to H6, and let me just change this one to H6 and save. You are going to see that it's going to be a lot smaller now. I can see just by using the appropriate tag, I'm able to tell the browser that, okay, handle this text this way or handle that text that way, and that just works fine. And I'm going to remove this. This is not the standard way to write HTML documents. I'm writing the HTML document just plainly inside of the HTML file, but there's something they call the HTML boilerplate, and that is you creating a standard template that helps the browser properly handle your HTML elements. And you can see that initially I'm actually having this yellow line, and let me just make this bigger a little bit. I'm having this yellow line under my HTML under my HTML elements, under the text that says doc type must be defined first, because by default there's a standard template that an HTML document has to follow, and that is, I'm just going to write it out. I'm not going to explain that over. This is not definitely an HTML class. So this is the standard boilerplate. we start with this doc type declaration, which is telling our browser that this is HTML5 we are trying to write. There are other types of doc type declaration. Then here we create a root HTML tag, which is going to be the container for everything on our web page. Then we say the default language we are using is English language. Then we have the HTML, root element has two children, and that is the head tag and then the body tag. Inside of the body tag is everything our user will get to see. And when I save this now and reload, you see that we will not see anything inside of our page. So the header tag is, like the brain of the page. That is the consciousness of the page. It contains information that the user doesn't necessarily get to see, but they are a crucial part of the HTML page. So if you look at here, we have a document in our title bar in our browser, and that document is coming from this title tag, and I will change this to what? Makeup class. Sorry, not class. And when I do that, you are going to see that when I reload, this changes to makeup class. So that's our page title. So all of that goes inside our head tag, and every other thing like the H1 I wrote initially is going to go inside our body tag, and I'm going to write hello world. And when I save that and reload my browser, it just kind of gives me that. And then the one other tag I like to talk about is just the paragraph tag, and I'll generate some random text for that. So when I save it, you see that under the header tag we have a paragraph tag. Then we also have a button tag, which I'm just going to run over fastly. I'm just going to put click me, and I'll save it. And you will see that we'll have a button on our page. So you can see that we are just using tag names to create this specific element on our HTML page here. And the page is gradually coming together. Then let me also show you the UL and LI tag. So UL, LI, and then I'll just say item 1. And this is a list item tag. So we are creating an unordered list. And let me just, kind of copy this down a little bit. So let me save it. So item, 1, item 2, item 3. So I'll save this. So you can see that we are just creating different elements, and by default the browser just knows how to handle each one of those elements because we are using the appropriate tag names. And you can see that by default HTML looks very ugly, in as much as some custom styling is being applied to the element. Like this one is a little bit bigger than this and it's bolder. So there's one other twin technology that we use together with HTML to make HTML look more beautiful and more appealing to the eyes, and that is called CSS. And the way we CSS stands for cascading style sheet, and the way we write CSS is by either embedding them in our HTML elements or our HTML documents, or directly inside of our HTML tags like this. And the way we do that is by putting an attribute. Remember I talked about attribute earlier. We can use the style attribute and add a couple of things inside of it, like color, for instance, to change the color of that hello world text. Maybe I'll change it to red, and when I save it and reload the browser, that text becomes red. Then I can also come here and decide to add a style attribute to our background, and a style attribute to our paragraph. And what I want to add is background color. I want to add a background color of blue, and then a color which is the text color of white. And when I do that and save and come to the browser and reload, you are going to see that we now have our paragraph with a blue background, white text, then our header still has a red red color. So that is one way of writing CSS. This what you see here is CSS, because in CSS what you are dealing with really is property, and you are dealing with value. So the property we want on this paragraph, we want a background color property, and then we want to give that background color property a value of blue. Here we have a color property on our H1, and we are giving it a value of red. So whenever you see a property value pair that suggests styling, that is basically you writing CSS in your HTML. But this way of writing HTML, like I said in the earlier classes, is not very scalable. So think of a situation whereby we have two H1s, and this is another H1, and I say hi there, which is the second H1. Then we have another third H1 that says don't say hello. And then these are three different headers, and they are all H1. So now I want to add this color of red to all my H1 elements. So now it gives me a problem. This color I added here cannot just be transferred over to this other element. I have to now copy this, style attribute that I put on the first element and paste it over the second and third element, and that works nice. Nobody is going to complain, nobody's going to cry about it. But the problem in that case is the fact that I have to start repeating the code over and over. Imagine I have 100 h1 elements overall in my web page. I have to repeat that style, copy and paste it in 100 different places. And the moment you have to start repeating a process as a programmer, you should know that something is wrong. When you start, having to, do the same thing in multiple times, because the actual idea behind programming is for you to be able to do something once and be able to, repeat that thing without having to repeat it, making the computer repeat the process for you. So that takes us to the next level of writing CSS, which I'm going to remove all the styling and add it to these 3 elements. So I'm going to remove that. So that takes us to the next level of adding CSS. And once I save this, our style will be gone on our H1. So it becomes the default black color. So I'll just have to go over to, my, head tag here. Remember I said elements you put here don't necessarily get displayed on the, browser screen, but they are crucial to the functioning of the page. So the second level of writing CSS is by writing CSS using the style tag. And that is called a block level CSS. What we did here is called inline CSS. We are writing CSS in line with the HTML element. But here we are writing CSS at a block level. And what we mean by that is we are creating our own special HTML tag called the style tag. And we are writing our CSS inside of it. So now we have a problem. For us to be able to style this H1 initially, we just had to come here and add a style attribute and add our style directly to the H1 element. Now, how do we select this HTML element inside of our CSS? And that brings us to the idea of CSS selectors. Yes, CSS selectors. Yeah. So CSS selectors help you select HTML elements like this H1, paragraph, button, and li inside of your CSS. So now how do we select this H1? The most basic way to select an HTML element is by selecting that element by the tag name. And guess what the tag name of this HTML element is? It is the H1. So the H1 text is the tag name of the H1 element. So we just write H1. And the way CSS works at the block level or at the external level is that you have to write the selector, which is the tag name in this case, then press space. You don't have to put space, but just to make it neater, we put space. Then you now create these curly braces here to create a new block, which is this nice bracket that we use in mathematics probably. So you press enter, and when you press enter, it kind of opens it up. You don't have to press enter, by the way. I'm just teaching you that so that you can write it in a neater way. So we have H1, which is the selector. This H1 here is the selector. Then the opening curly brace and the closing curly brace. Then all of your CSS rule, which is the property value pair, will have to go inside of this opening and closing curly braces. So what we do here now is to just add what we added before, which is the color. Color is the property and the value is red. And nothing will happen because I haven't saved it yet. So the moment I save it now, and the way I have not saved it is because of this yellow circle on top of the file name. And let me just close this. This yellow circle suggested that I have unsaved changes. So when I save it and I reload the page, you will see that all of those 3 elements now have the red color, and I don't have to apply that color to each one of them. I just simply apply the color to them by selecting the tag name. And this tag name selector is very standard, but it is not it will actually run into some kind of problems eventually. But before we start talking about the problems with selectors, let us start talking about the problems with our block level CSS here. So the problem with the
Hello?
Yes.
Sorry, I need to ask you.
Okay. I'm with you.
Is there a reason why is there a reason why my as in my VS Code or the VS Visual Studio, why it doesn't automatically underline stuff the way if there's an error, the way your own underlines? That's number one. Then number two, even when I press, like when you just type color or you type red, it just comes up automatically, and it doesn't seem to be like that for me.
Okay, like in Visual Studio Code, like I think if I'm not mistaken, I should have about 23 different extensions already installed. And the extensions kind of just enhances your work. I've installed a lot of them, but I don't even know what they do anymore. I don't know which one is responsible for what. But you have some kind of extensions on Visual Studio Code, like the HTML, what's it called? HTML snippets. Yeah, this one. I think I have that installed. So it kind of just gives you HTML snippets, like more like when I type a tag name and gives me suggestions and so on. So this HTML CSS is handy. Then I think I have this IntelliSense and CSS, what's it called? So there are different extensions, and you can see that this has over 9 million people who have downloaded it. So it's very useful. So I can just maybe drop a link to, or drop a list of extensions that I have installed and what they do in case you need them.
Please help us.
Okay. So that's fine. So Gina, you were saying you are not seeing my, what I'm presenting clearly. I think it.
No, I'm seeing now.
Okay. So
I
that's
think it was a network issue.
Okay, that's fine. So here in this case, we now have our color on the H1. So I said before we start talking about the limitations of using the keyword and the tag name selector, let us start looking at the limitations of using block level CSS. So I'll go back to my file system here. Sorry, my Explorer in Visual Studio Code, and I'll create another file, and I'll call that file about.html, and I'll just create the normal simple HTML boilerplate. And here I'm going to call my, I'm going to give it a title of about us. And you shouldn't see anything basically here, but and for me to be able to link to that other page, I'll just create a quick link tag. And the way you link to HTML pages is just by using this anchor tag here, and I'm going to go to /about.html, and I'll save it. So I will have a link on my document now, and I'm not seeing the link. So let me just okay, sorry, I haven't written a content inside the links. I'll write about us. So I'll save it. So I'll reload that, and I'll see about us. When I click on it, okay, what's the problem? So it says about, okay, I think the problem is it's actually looking at this from the root level. So I think this is the point where I get to use live server now to actually run this, so that we don't run into that problem. So I'll just, and for those of you who are in the initial classes, you know what live server does. So instead of me having to open an HTML file by using this kind of opening through my file system and selecting the file and so on and doing all of this. So what live server does for me, it does two things for me. It kind of just creates a local server for me, and using a proxy to kind of just create the link to my local pages for me. And then the second thing it does is that whenever I save a page, it kind of automatically reloads it for me, because now I have to press reload every time I make a new change to my page, which is not very, very optimal. But for live server, it's just going to kind of create those. It's going to automatically what's it called? Automatically refresh my page whenever I have a new change. So I'll open this with live server by right clicking. I already have the live server extension installed as well. So the live server extension is this extension. So I have live server. So which is this server here? Yeah. Is this the server? No, I don't think that. Okay, this is the live server. I can see I have it already installed here. So that's what's responsible for that feature. So I can come over here now and right click on my index.html and click on open with live server. And when I click on open with live server, it just kind of opens it, but it opens it in my Chrome, not my Brave browser. So let me just copy the link over here and paste it then. When I go here, it should open the exact same page. So in this case now, I think I should be able to just switch between those pages, and you will take a look at it here that whenever I make a change that is press Ctrl S like this, it is going to automatically reload, as you can see. So and this has taken me to the about page now, and the about page has no content. So I'll just create a quick H1 tag and I'll call it about us, and that's going to be our about page. And the reason why I'm going through this, and inside of our about page, I'm also going to create an anchor tag which is going to link back to our home page.html, and I'm just going to write home page inside of the link. So I'll press Ctrl S, and it's when I click here, it takes me back to the home page, and when I click here, it takes me to the about page. So I'll go to the home page now, and what I'm trying to the reason why we are going through this is I'm trying to show you the limitation. You can see that we have an H1 already styled here using the red tag, using the red color. But in our about us, we also have another H1 element. But but you can see that that doesn't have the color of red. And what if on your web page you have a very similar header across all pages? How do you now apply the style you've already added to a particular HTML document or page to every other page? That takes us to the third level of using CSS, which is the external CSS. So I'm going to get rid of this style I applied here, and I'm going to just cut it out. I'm going to use Ctrl X, and I'm not going to copy the tag because in external CSS we won't be needing this tag. We're just going to be creating a new CSS file. So I'm going to cut the rule set inside of it, which is the selector and property value pair, and I'll delete this. Then what I'll do is I'll save, and when I save, you see that our H1, and you see the browser automatically reloads itself. But the style on the paragraph still remains because the paragraph is using inline styling, as you can see. Yeah, we are not using block level styling. So I removed the block level styling. It only affected the header. Didn't affect the paragraph because the paragraph doesn't depend on that style we removed. So I will create another file and I'll call it, index.css. Or let me just call it style.css. And style.css is basically a CSS, style document. And you can see that it has its own special kind of icon. So now we are going to paste back that rule set we copied in our HTML back here. And when we paste it, I'll save. And you can see when I save, it was initially like this. The moment I save, you see that my indentation is properly corrected. And what does that for me is this Predia extension. It kind of just automatically indents my, my code for me. And that's this extension. You already have it installed. So it automatically formats that for me. So this is not an extension class, so I won't be talking much on that. So now you see our page is reloaded, but we don't actually see that style being applied. So why is it not being applied? It is because when we are writing external CSS, we have to link it explicitly inside of our HTML document. And the way we link that is by using this HTML link tag. And then the link tag will take in some attributes. And the first attribute, remember I said attributes are like characteristics. And you can use the link tag to do so many other things. But one of the things we use it to do is to link our external CSS file with our HTML document. So we are going to link it as such using the attribute href, and we are going to target that style.css file. Let me just do /style.css, and that's the file we are targeting. Then we have to specify the relationship, and the relationship that this file has with our HTML element is that it's the style sheet.
I have a question.
Okay.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, sir. So I noticed that the CSS extension, you have to open another page for it that's called CSS style.css.
I created a new file. Why do we
have to do that?
Yeah, I created a file.
Like a new page. Okay, new file.
Yeah, because it's
Why
a file.
that?
This is a file. Remember I said we can see HTML or most of the things we are talking about as a document. HTML will first be a document before it is a web page. It is when you successfully written the document, you will have a web page. So the browser interprets your document into a page or translates your document into a page. But what you wrote originally is a document. It's like the Microsoft Word document, CorelDRAW document. But it is maybe when you output it, it now gets translated into something else. So the reason why we are creating this file is because I'm trying to talk about the limitation of writing block level CSS. Because now we have two different pages, about us and home page, and each one of them have an H1 element. But initially our home page had red color on the H1 element, but the about us page wasn't catching that style. So in order for us to be able to share the style across two different pages or two or more pages, we have to be able to create an external style sheet that we can now link in each one of our HTML documents. So which is what we are doing now with this link tag. So we are linking that style.css that we created inside of our HTML. You can see that we are in our home page.html now. You get it? Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah, so now once I save it, it is going to apply that color back. And you can see that nothing is really happening inside of our about.html. Now we have to also link that file inside our about.html, and we do it the exact same way. We just do the link tag, then we specify the href attribute, and the href attribute is going to be targeting our styles.css, which is where the file is in our folder or on our computer basically. Then we are going to say the relationship is that this file is a style sheets. Then I'm going to close the tag and save it. Then you're going to see that this is also having a color of red now. And we are writing only one CSS, but we are sharing it across 2 pages, our home page and our about page. Does that make sense? So in that case, yeah, we don't have to write this here again anymore. We don't even have to write this, style on the paragraph tag. We don't have to write that. So I'll just cut that out. Then when I save it, you see
Sorry,
that.
I don't know whether I'm moving too fast, but I don't understand.
Which part do you not understand, please?
I don't understand the linking thing, right? You're dealing with 3 pages now, right?
2 pages actually. This is not a page. This is a CSS file. It is a style sheet. It is not an HTML document. And
okay,
I said it in initial classes that
this is in block style.
Sir? No. This is external CSS, not block level CSS now.
Yeah, okay.
Block level
CSS
external. Is limited to each
block level
HTML
CSS
document.
is inside. It's inside the HTML document.
Yes,
right?
and it's limited. You cannot share it with another HTML document. You have to copy and paste it there. So now when we
so what you are doing, the external one allows you to share the same CSS
across multiple HTML
several HTML files.
Exactly. And the way we do that is by adding this link tag here and linking that CSS file we created, which is this file. So now we can write all our.
That is by. Sorry, I didn't.
Sir?
No, I didn't hear that. I think it was a network thing.
Yeah, we use this.
The way we do that.
We use this link tag, specifying this href attribute, which is going to be pointing to the file we are targeting, the CSS file we are targeting. Then we specify the relationship and we call it a style sheet because CSS really is what? A cascading style sheet, right?
Style sheet.
Yeah, so we are saying the relationship. Okay.
Let me ask one question.
Okay, sir.
Just to clarify, please. This href thing, immediately you typed link, it seemed to come up almost immediately.
Yeah.
Is it still the add-ons?
Yeah. No, and I think Visual Studio Code has many of those things by default. And I've been writing for so long, I don't even know which one comes by default. I've not had to install VS Code since over, let's say, a year or 2 now. The last time I installed Visual Studio Code was when I got a new computer. This computer I'm using now. So, the thing is that once I log in with an account on Visual Studio Code, and most times when I log in, it just kind of just transfers all the extension I have on one laptop to another laptop. You get, so I don't have to install. So it's hard for me to know what extension does what. But as at the beginning level, I don't also encourage using all of these extensions. I believe in you having being able to type the syntax comfortably by yourself. Then you can now start looking for snippets to help you type faster. Not because you don't know how to originally, but because now you need to go fast. You get the point?
Or could it be because of the kind of system? Maybe you use a MacBook. Probably because we use.
No. I have a Windows and it's exactly the same thing. I have a Windows. It's exactly the same experience. Most times, if you see that I do some things, your Visual Studio Code doesn't do it by default. Know that I have an extension that does that for me. But I'm going to drop a list of the useful extensions at least at the beginning stage. But I don't recommend using them still. As a matter of fact, I have some very, very useful ones as well. Like the ones that maybe when I'm writing JavaScript or I just write the name of a function and it just gives me an idea of maybe an example code I can use if I want, or maybe just ignore if I don't want it, depending on whether or not it fits into my own use case. So that kind of thing. So, but let's not dwell. I believe in you writing everything. If possible, don't even use this exclamation tab to generate your boilerplate. I believe in you writing the boilerplate. And the more you write it, the more familiar you become with it. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay.
So that's nice.
Understood.
Yeah. So we have.
Understood.
So the essence of this link tag.
So sorry. Last question.
Okay.
Sorry. Guys, forgive me.
No, it's fine.
So that means that the inline styling or the inline is when you write your style or whatever inside the HTML code, as in inside the particular HTML line.
You write it on the element as an attribute,
I mean on
using the style attribute. Yeah. Like
yeah.
this. Yeah.
Okay, now I understand.
Why the block level?
Now it's now that I see the difference between block and
external.
So block is like you are grouping many together.
Yeah, block level is by using the style tag so that I can apply, I can be able to use that same particular rule set across multiple elements, similar elements. You get the point. But I now said, okay, for instance, the limitation of inline styling is that what you cannot share CSS between between two elements or more. That's the limitation of writing your style on an element. So we now transcended into writing it at a block level, and we now realize that here you cannot share it outside of that particular HTML file. So we now have to start writing external ones. That is so that we can write it in an external file and import that file inside any HTML document whatsoever, as long as we feel that that style sheet is going to be useful to that particular HTML document. You get the point? So it makes sense now. Okay, so that's what we are doing here basically. So we now have 2 pages. We are using the same style sheet, and let me just, to make it more vivid, let me just kind of change the background color sorry, of the body tag, and I'm using the tag name selector. So the body tag, and I'm using a background color of light is like coral, just to make it obvious. So you can see that we have a background color here, and on about us too, we also have a background color, and we're using just one rule and one CSS file, and we are sharing across both HTML pages, or documents rather. So we can go on and on to do that. So now how do we make this external CSS more powerful, or not having to write CSS on an HTML element like we did at the very beginning? So how we make that more powerful is by understanding the idea of selector precedence, and to understand the cascade, because CSS is a cascading style sheet, and the idea of cascade means you stack things on top of each other from top to bottom. And when you stack things on top of each other as though, you have to have a way to prioritize them. So priority is what the cascade actually brings to the table. It prioritizes styling, that is the CSS rule you are applying, based on the precedence of its selector. So this tag name selector is what we've been looking at so far, and tag name selector is basically you selecting an element by using the tag name to select it. And you can see that since we apply this color of red to our H1, it doesn't matter how many H1s we have inside of home page or about, it's going to have that color of red by default. Do you understand?
Excuse me, sir. Please, can you repeat the cascading again?
Okay, the cascade is actually like the idea behind the cascade is like the management inside of CSS, and it is how CSS manages what rules you apply to what elements. Because when we start delving deeper into the idea of CSS selectors, you can actually have a selector, or sorry, more than one selector targeting the same HTML element, and I will show you what I mean by that in a bit. Because currently we're using it
Prioritizes what?
It prioritizes what rule set will be applied to an HTML element per time. That's what the cascade does, and it does that using having 3 things in mind, and that is specificity of a selector, then inheritance, and then importance. So how important is a rule set is to an element? Is a rule set being inherited from a parent element? Because there's always this parent to child relationship in HTML. And what I mean by parent to child relationship is that by default our H1 is a child of our body tag. Yes, and you can see this indentation actually tells you what begat what. And to make that kind of clear, I'm just going to kind of create a div element here. And the best way to explain parent to child relationship is by using a div element. And a div element basically is a blank dummy element that doesn't really bring anything to the table. The goal of a div element is for you to be able to group more than one thing together, or maybe to do some other special HTML HTML operations. So now let's say we have inside of our div we have and I don't want to start bringing an image, but let me just bring in an image. So I have an image, and currently I have to go and start digging for images on the internet. So I'll just look for any random images. Okay, let's look for okay, I don't want that ugly ugly dog. It's not ugly because God created all things bright and beautiful. So let's say it's not ugly, but I don't like it. So yeah, so that's that. No, I don't want that particular Jesus. I already removed it. So let me just go back to my history and kind of go to that particular image. So I'll go to that image, the nice dog image. Let me not call it ugly dog image. So go to the nice dog image, and I want to go to the web page so that I can be able to get a nice link, because that initial link generated by Google doesn't look so great. So I'll copy the image address, and this image address could be a place on your on your computer locally. So let me just close that. We have that now. So when I save this now, you are going to see that image in our HTML. So we have that here. So now it is saved, and let's just let's call this the alt attribute. Actually talks about the alternative text, and I don't know why spelling is such a big work for me. So let's just add another attribute, and that's the width attribute. Let's just give it a 200 width, and that's 200 pixels. So make it smaller, and let's add a horizontal rule at the top, because we are doing plain and this thing. So that's this horizontal. So you can see I'm using different tag to just do what I intend to do. And let's just maybe probably add a line break here, and also add a line break before that. Yeah. So we'll save it, and then there'll be more spacing here now. I added 2 line breaks, but that's fine. So
I have a question.
Okay.
So the selectors that you talked about, right?
Yeah. Hello?
Is it that parenthesis sign that is selector?
No. The selector now, that's what I'm about to come to. That's why I created this div actually. I'm trying to talk about inheritance. Like now, it is safe to say that this image is a child of the div. Yeah. And the div is a child of the body. You get it? So that's how hierarchy works in HTML. And the cascade in CSS actually puts that hierarchy into consideration using something called under a particular feature called inheritance. So with inheritance, the cascade puts this parent to child relationship in HTML into consideration. So far we've looked at the tag name selector. There are other types of selector. We have the tag name selector. We have selector based on attributes.
Okay.
Yeah. Then we have
I want to ask one last question.
Okay.
Maybe not the last. Anyway, I noticed that the style CSS doesn't have any head.
No, it doesn't need to have any head. It is a style sheet.
So it just starts with body.
We just put no. There's no. You don't know. That's not the body. This body basically is. I just used it to add a background color to the body. What you have in your CSS is just a bunch of rule sets, and the rule set is always in the order of the selector. That is the element you are targeting. Open a code block using these curly braces, then write your property and value per inside of it. This doesn't have to be the body. This could have been the paragraph. It could have been anything. You get? It doesn't have to be the body.
Okay, now I see. So that thing that is at the beginning is the HTML elements that you're targeting.
Yes, and that is the selector. So the way I'm targeting it, Triumph, are you with us? The way I'm targeting is I'm targeting is using
So
the class.
it's more like you are selecting the element you're targeting.
Yes, and this one now, this way of selecting the element is called the tag name selector. We are selecting the element using the tag name. There are different other ways to select an element. So, and we are going to look at that in a bit. And it's very important we understand this. Because we have external CSS, we are no longer applying CSS to an element directly. When we're writing inline styling, we didn't have to select. We're already on the element. But now we have to select because we are not on the element. We have to be able to tell CSS that, if there were no selectors, how does CSS know which element to go and apply a particular style to? No way, right?
Okay, now I understand.
Do you get it? So the selector now is how we tell CSS
Yes,
that this is the element I'm talking about. Go and style that element for me. So that is the idea of CSS selectors. Basically, that's the idea of CSS selectors.
Okay.
The selector is selecting an element.
Like,
you get?
So
it's just
like
more like
where
okay.
Just
I'm listening, sir.
to use a different analogy, it's to like it's like telling, like how I put it, like dressing a particular element, telling you what clothes to wear.
Yes. So now CSS is the dresser. No, how does the dresser know which person to dress? So that is what we use the selector to do. And there are different types of selectors. So the first one we are looking at so far now is the tag name selector. We are selecting elements based on the tag name. And now that is a problem because now we have more than one H1 element. So what if we want to apply blue to this second H1 element on the home page? How do we do that? That means we have to look for a different way to tell CSS that we are talking about that particular H1, not all the H1. You get the point? So that in that case, we cannot use the tag name selector because as long as we use the tag name selector, it is going to apply the style to all of the elements with that tag name. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes, it makes sense.
Makes sense, right? Yeah. So that's the idea basically, to tell CSS, this is the element I need you to select. That is what selectors are. So now that we know what selectors are, let me just go over the other selectors we have. And I'm going to go over two basically. If you want to understand others, I think there's a class that actually covers, or maybe that was the class that was not, but that's by the way, So now I want to start the second H1 element. How do I tell CSS that it is this particular one? I can now use another HTML attribute called ID. And I will use that ID to ID this header. And I'm going to call it second header. So now we've added something unique to this header, which this one doesn't have and this one doesn't have. Now, how do we tell CSS that it should select this our second header based on the ID name we give to it? And this could be any name. I just decided to use second header. I can even use something like Amala, if that makes sense. But that would be absurd. It could be any name whatsoever. The name you call it doesn't really matter. So how do we, tell CSS to find this element based on this ID? So that brings us to the idea of ID selectors. So the ID selector uses this syntax. We use this hashtag. Then we write the name of the ID that we wrote. And what is the name we gave to it? We call it second header, right? Is that what we call it? So we open another code block in front of it to introduce another rule set. So we're going to give this one a color of blue. So you can see that now the second one, because of the ID we gave to it, now has what? A color of blue. And then this other one just follows the universal, color we added using this tag. So as many elements as will have this tag name, will have this, this property, this red property we applied. As many H1 will have on our, document. But this one is pertaining to just one element that we just added that ID attribute to. So only that element is styled blue, in as much as it is not the only H1 that exists on this page, but that ID is unique to that element. And that will actually, lead me to telling you another important thing about the ID, attribute on HTML element. You cannot add more than one ID. You cannot add the same ID to more than one HTML element like this. You see that HTML, you have this line. The ID value has to be unique. So instead of saying this one is the second header, we just call this one the third header, and that error will go away because ID must be unique. It's just like math number. Having tag names to select HTML element is like a lecturer entering into your class and saying all the boys should stand up. And definitely that instruction applies to all the boys. But so now if the lecturer comes again and says all the Yoruba boys should stand up, now this is more specific compared to the first instruction. The first instruction targets all the boys, but the second one is talking about just a particular set of boys. So that's what the ID has actually been able to help us to. So the H1 tag name selector talks about all the H1, but the ID is now talking about a particular H1 element. Do you get the point? So just see the ID for HTML elements as though that is the matriculation number, because you cannot use the same ID number for more than one HTML element. The same ID, whatever value for more than one HTML element. So that's that about that. So another attribute I'm going to show you is the class name attribute. And because we have a third header here, I'm just going to change this from ID to class, just to show you what that means. So I'm going to say class, and that's how you write the class attribute. So I want this to just be styled with the tag name. I want this to be styled with an ID. I want this to be styled with a class name. So this class name attribute is how we style this third header. So I'm going to copy this property and the tag name, the class name with Control C, and you see that nothing changes. But when we go here, how do we now tell CSS that it should select this element? And by the way, I think let me just apply an ID as well so that you can see a clearer thing and see it in a clearer light. So let me say third header. So we have third header as an ID, we have third header as a class name. So how do I tell CSS to style this header as a class name with a class name, not with an ID? So you can see now that I'm going to use this, dots to target that element, and dot actually applies to class names. Hashtag applies to ID selectors. Dot applies to class name selectors. So when I press space and I style this with a color of green, not column rule, and I give it a color of green, and with a color of green you can see that this last one now has a color of green, the second one has a color of blue, this first one still has this generic one that we are applying here. So now we have the same H1 element and we have 3 different styles on them just by selecting them with unique selector or different selectors. I selected this one with the class name, I selected this one with the ID, I selected this one with the normal HTML element name. So now we are going to go into the idea of selector precedence. So now we've learned 3 selectors so far. We have the class the tag name selector, which is the name of the element itself, which is how we select this P and H1. Then we have the ID selector, which is noted is distinguished by this hashtag. Then we have the class name selector, which is distinguished by this period sign or the full stop sign. So now I'm going to pick, just to show you the idea of selector precedence, I'm going to show you, I'm going to copy this same third header, ID name.
Question for you go on.
Okay.
Just clarification. So I kind of understand the tag name. I understand the ID selector, right? Like you're giving a particular identification to an element that you want CSS to style. Well, this class one, I'm not sure I get it.
Okay. Like I said before,
what's the difference apart from what identifies it?
Yeah, we will see that eventually. But you know that the class is an HTML attribute. The ID is also an HTML attribute. Just like the style that we used initially to style our element is also an HTML attribute. Do you get the point? So it's just more like saying, okay, this is a car, and the car has a wheel. Now we're interested to know what kind of wheel does it have. It has tires. We're interested to know what kind of tire does it have. So all of those things that the car has are attributes of the car. I'm talking about God. We say attribute of God is holy, is kind, is merciful, and so on. So all these attributes will have value. And HTML elements are similar. They also have attributes. But writing HTML by default, we don't have to apply all of those attributes. We can now apply those attributes if we need them or not. But there are some attributes that are compulsory to some elements. For instance, when we're going to introduce our style sheet, if we didn't put this href attribute, our HTML elements can't find that particular CSS file. So the href attribute is very important. The rel attribute is very important. So there are some attributes that are requested for by default, while there are some other attributes that they are optional. You have to apply them if you want. And a good example is this my image tag. I can decide to get rid of this, get rid of this width attribute, and my image is still going to display because the width attribute is not a must. I'm just using it to tell HTML to kind of reduce the width of my image to 200 or increase it to 200 depending on what the initial width was. So but now we are adding some custom attributes to our element so that we can be able to select them in CSS. Doesn't mean we have to add those attributes, but those attributes exist and we can use them if we need to use them. So we are now using those attributes as selectors for our HTML. Does that make sense? Hello?
Yes, it makes sense. I think the part is that how the ID is kind of unique.
Yeah, it has to be unique.
It's like it's an identifier. I kind of understand it.
Yeah.
But I want to know what identifies as in what makes me, why will I want to use a class selector? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Instead of using an ID.
Yeah, we'll come to that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm about going to. And I will use that to explain the idea of selector precedence and why class names are also very powerful. And let me just go into that since you asked. And if there's any other person that has a question, please, I beg you in the name of God, just ask. Just ask. That is why we're having this class. If you have questions and you don't ask it, it's more like this class is a waste of time. So I will just kind of show you the idea of selector precedence, because we have the very same value for our class attribute here and our ID attribute on the same element. Does that make sense? And that means we can actually target those two elements using we can target that same element using those two different selectors inside of our CSS. And we're already targeting that element with our class name selector. Now we want to target that same element, which is this H1 here, with our ID attribute or selector. So that's the H3, and I'm going to use this ID selector, and I'm going to paste it here, paste the name here. And ID is always with the hashtag, class names are always with the full stop. So I'm going to apply a color of yellow to that, and guess what the color is going to be? Can anybody guess? Huh?
Brown.
Why will it be brown? There's no brown here. Are we mixing the color? No, the colors won't mix up. Oh, Jesus. It's not. We are not mixing colors.
Maybe the color is going to mix up.
No.
You already use a class to name it as green header, and probably will be a color mixture. Sorry for that.
Okay, first of all, remember I said, I've said it. Maybe you went in that class. CSS, first of all, runs from top to bottom. So that means, let me just get rid of this now. Let me get, and I'll comment this out. This is what a CSS comment looks like. And I will do that same class name selector, which is this one. And I will apply a color of, what do we apply now? Orange. Or orange red. If that makes sense. Or let me do orange. Just to make it vivid. Then when I save it, guess what the color will be? CSS runs from top to bottom. The color will be orange. Remember, we are using the same selector. Is a class name selector for the same element. Do you get the point? But we are applying different rule sets inside of our CSS, targeting the same, using the same selector. So when I save it, the color is going to be orange because CSS runs from top to bottom. Do you get the idea? It runs from top to bottom. So automatically it sees this style, it applies it. Then when it sees this next one, targeting the same element, it applies this one instead. It applies the latest style to an element based on what it finds last concerning that element in your document. Does that make sense? So CSS runs from top to bottom. I'll just remove that and bring back this one. So now we are targeting the same element using two different selectors. And guess what the style will be? Remember I said CSS runs from top to bottom. So guess what the style will be in this case? The color will be.
Okay. Is it not
the color will be green?
Green.
Is it important?
Yes.
Okay, someone said green.
On top, it will be blue.
It will blue. Okay.
Blue.
Okay.
No, we are talking about the third header.
Yeah.
We are talking about the third header. This
specific.
is pertaining to the second header.
Okay, then I want it to be. It will be yellow. It will be yellow.
Why will it be yellow?
It's yellow. Because yellow has a stronger, what's it called?
I think it's blue.
Because yellow is an ID selector.
But this one is a
More
class
specific.
selector.
Yellow is more powerful than, I mean, the selector. Yellow selector. That hashtag is more powerful than the
Okay, that means yellow goes to the gym, but green doesn't go to the gym. Is that what it means? Okay. The reason is because, and that's what we are trying to explain now. Remember, we are targeting the very same element. It is this very same homepage element we are targeting. And take a look at that. The H1, this third one, has an ID and has a class name. And in our CSS, we are selecting this same element using both the ID and the class name. And then when we apply that now, on the ID we are applying a color of red, on the class name we are applying a color of yellow. And I will save that now just to kill the curiosity. And guess what the color will be? It is going to be yellow. And that brings us to the subject of selector precedence. Selector precedence actually deals with how the cascade in CSS prioritizes each rule set or style rule that you are writing in your CSS, how it prioritizes it and knows which one to apply to an element. So in the order of precedence, an ID, remember I said before, can only be applied once given that same value on an element, and you cannot apply an ID of that same value on another element. So that makes the ID more specific compared to any selector in that right. So this is the law of selector precedence. The law of selector precedence actually states that the more specific a CSS selector is to an element, the more authority that selector has to apply a style on that element. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So for instance,
that means in this instance, it was the ID that was going to be more specific.
Yeah, because it is more specific. This class name now, and when you were asking about the importance of class name, I can actually, create another H1 element, and you can see it complains about the idea that the ID must be unique, but it doesn't complain about the fact that the class name must be unique. So I can apply this same class name to this other element. So when I save it, and I will say this is my fourth header, this is Indian fourth header. So when I save that, it will apply that same color, green, which is on this selector, to that fourth header, because you can apply the same class name to more than one HTML element. Do you get the point? But for the ID, you cannot apply it to more than one element. It has to be unique for every element. But the class does not have to be unique for every element. So you can use the class to actually share style between more than one element.
So that brings me to a question.
Okay.
So does that mean that
Sir, I can't hear you.
That's it. Yeah. So does that mean that with a class header, right, you can use a div and apply it to multiple elements?
As in now, with a class header, as in now.
Okay, with an ID selector,
yeah,
you're just using it for one element.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So it's particular to one element. So I mean, as in, can you apply a class to a group? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, you can apply a class to virtually anything. A button, a link, whatever it is. And you can share the class if you feel that.
I mean, with multiple elements.
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
Yes, you
can share.
You can share with multiple elements. You can apply to an element that groups other elements. You can apply to any element.
You are saying same class. We can apply same class to other element, right?
Same class, the same class with the same value. Okay, let me just do something now. Let me create a class of, and let me just do that. Class of red, or let me say class of gray background. And we'll just apply this gray background class to different elements. And nothing happens for now. But I'll just copy that class name, and the value. And apply it to our paragraph as well. And remember our paragraph already has, a color of red. And then we're already applying a background color of light coral here. But let's just, apply that, what's it called? The gray background class name in our CSS and add a style to it. So let's apply a background color of gray, and let's save that. You can see that now there's a gray background on this and this just by using this singular rule set with this class name selector, which we are applying to this H1 here and to our paragraph here. And I can also go further to even apply it to my button and save it, and you see that our button will have a gray background now. Can you see that? Hello? Does that make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you can see that the style applied through this class name overrides the style applied to the
No, please do it again.
Sir? Hello? Hello?
He was saying you should repeat it again. I guess
Kindly do that again, please.
Okay, I said we are applying this gray background here to this class, this header, and then this button. We apply the same class name, and you can see that it's the very same class name. Then that class name, we selected it in CSS and we applied a rule set to it that is a property value pair, which is a background color gray, and it applied to 3 of them. So you use class names to apply styles. For instance, when you have to share that style across different elements, you can use the class name.
Okay.
Yeah, and you can apply, and you can see that now our class is actually overriding the default and the background color we applied to the paragraph using the paragraph selector. And that's because the class name has a higher precedence compared to the tag name, while the ID has a higher precedence compared to the class name. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's fine. So let me just go over CSS box model and then we'll close for tonight. I think that's pretty much everything you need to understand. Now you understand the relationship and now you can select elements across. And if you have questions, just start cooking the questions as fast as possible. So the CSS box model is actually, it's talking about the fact that everything in HTML is rendered inside of a box. That is, every HTML element actually imitates the nature of a box. And I'm just going to open this window and make it bigger, and I'm going to just right click on this first element up here. On right clicking on that element, I didn't actually talk about everything I did. So I'll right click on the element, this H1 element, and I'll click on inspect. Then it's going to bring the developer console, and developer console just shows me every element I have on my page. Then the emphasis we want to make is on this other aspect where we actually see the styles we are applying. You can see that the styles are being applied here, and I can disable and enable styles. Just this is for you to debug and know what is wrong with your code. If something is wrong, you can use this developer tool to actually inspect. You can use it to add styles directly inside of here. Add styles directly inside of here and see what that will look like when you go and add it inside your code. So the idea of the box model is this. So the box model talks about the fact that every HTML element is rendered in a box, and this box, this innermost item in this box, or this innermost section in this box, talks about the element itself. Then right after that we have the padding of the element. Then we now have the border. Then we have the margin. And then I have this illustration I used during the other class. Let me see if I can just get that out so that we can just use it for this class as well. So I use an illustration using a building. So imagine every HTML element as though it is a building, and imagine the padding as though it is the compound, the border as though it is the fence, and then the margin as though it is the outside of the house. So I'll just bring up that that slide, then show you guys what I mean by everything I've said so far. So I'll just present that in a bit, and let me just go over that in a bit. So I'm going to run very fast. This is about 20 slides, but let me just go over it very fast. So I'll just go to the last one. So this is okay. Sorry, this is the box model. So the box model has these various parts. The first part, from the outermost part, is the margin. It is the outermost part of an HTML element. It is it is the space between an HTML element and other elements that surrounds it or are around it. So that's the margin. The border is actually the border sits between the margin and surrounds the padding of an element, and it kind of demarcates the outside of an element from the inside of an element, and we'll look at what that means in a bit. Then the padding is the space that an element has from the edge of that element itself, the space between the content and the edge of the element, which is the border. Then the content is the element itself, the content of the element. So this is what the HTML box model looks like. So we have the content. After that we have the padding, which is, and it's always in a 4-dimensional plane. So we have the 2-dimensional plane, the length, 3-dimensional plane, that's 3, length, height, length and breadth, rather, not 3-dimensional, 2-dimensional plane, length and breadth. So we have the length and the breadth. So on both sides, so we have the padding surrounding the content, and the content is right in the middle. Then we have the border surrounding the padding, and separating it from the margin. Then the margin is the outermost part. And let's look at that with a building example. So see the content as the house, the building. Then this is the building. Then the compound is the padding, which is also a part of the house, because when you apply background color, it is going to also include the areas or where you added the padding to. Then the fence is the border, and you can make that as thick or thin as possible. Probably you are building a wall of Jericho, so your border can be very, very fat. Yeah, then your margin is the outside of the element that spaces it out from every other element, and I'll show you what I mean by that in a bit. So that's the box model. So you can have an H1, have a padding of 15 pixels, have a margin of 2 pixels, have a border of 50 pixels, and depending on what you want to do with that. So let me just close that. So that's that about the slide. So
Okay, before you jump, sir,
okay,
is that thing you said about the house? Can you please just go? The neighborhood is the margin.
okay, I will show you
Just
from
that
I will show you
place
from
where you
code
had
now.
this.
I will show you
That's
from,
wait.
yeah, I'll show you from code. So what I mean by that, so we have this
The
particular,
way you describe them, so that it allows it to sync or to stick.
okay, let me go over that again then. Let me just, I'm just feeling lazy to present the slide. It's already closed.
Sorry.
So that's fine. So so let's just go over it again. So the content is the innermost part. Next to that is the padding, and next is the border, which is like the demarcation between the internal part of the content and the external part of the content. And the internal part of the content actually includes both the padding and the content itself. But the padding is not the content, but you understand that when you apply something like a background color, the background color still applies to the padding, and that's why I want to consider your padding and your content as your entire compound, but your content is the main building. So that's what we have here. So the content is the actual building. That is your H1 element. Whatever you write inside of it is the content. Then the padding is from the edge of your fence, which is the end of your element, and then where your element actually is. What is the spacing you want to add to it? You can decide to add 0 spacing, and you can decide to add as much spacing as you want. Then next to that is your border, which is like the line of demarcation between the inside of your element and your outside of your element. So which is like the demarcation between your compound and your neighborhood and whoever is beside you. That is your fence. Your border is your fence. Then the margin is now the spacing. When government says, okay, leave maybe 50 yards or how many, whatever they tell you to leave between the express and your road. So just consider that kind of spacing as the margin. So it is not your, you don't own the margin. The margin is really what spaces you out from others. So it's like the road beside your house and the road between your house and the electric pole, that space. So that's what the margin kind of represents. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay. So
It does, sir.
okay. So let me just, pick this first H1 element here and add. I will add margin, I will add padding, and I will add border so that you guys can see what I'm talking about. So I'll pick the first H1, and that is this H1 here. And then okay, I actually wanted to use a different selector, but let me not be tempted. Let me just use an ID and say first header, and I'll save that. Jesus. First header, and I'll just bring that down here. So what I normally do, I used to style my, so first header is not, am I making a mistake now? What's the mistake I'm making? I'm actually making a mistake. There's an error now. What is the error? Can anybody spot it? I want to select this element based on this ID, and I wrote this in my CSS. So what is the problem?
You should be using an hash, not a
yeah, exactly. So I should be using an ID selector, not a class name selector. So now what we want to do, we want to deal with the box model now. And the box model, we talk about, first of all, let's deal with the padding. That is the next to our content. Our content is already there and nothing is wrong with it. So let's deal with our padding. and our padding, we want to add a padding of 20 pixels, and see what happens now. You remember that this is the edge of this, this our h1, and our h1 is a block level element. That is why it is going all the way across our screen. So if I add a margin of 20 pixels, you will see that the spacing between the content itself and the edge of the content will actually increase. So look at what happens. Can you see that now? So the padding actually gives you that space between, and when I inspect this element now, you can see the padding now. The padding is 20 pixels. You can see that area around the element, but this is the element itself. Can you see that? Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, and by default there's this default margin that our everything like our h1 has and our paragraph has. So let me just use another special kind of selector, which is the universal selector. And I must stress it at this point that the universal selector has the lowest precedence possible. So we are going to set the margin here to 0, and that's what's responsible for all this spacing you are seeing by default around the the elements. We don't need that spacing because of what I want to explain now. So I will also add padding by default to be 0 for every element. When I save that, every space will disappear. Yeah, so everything now looks choked up together. But you see that our padding on this h1 still remains, and we want to start building on that. So you can see that this other h1 and this one actually look so close, and they are almost like together. So now we want to space this our house, this building, from this other building. So but before we do that, let's also add a border. So I'll add a border, and I'll add a border of 1 pixel. 1 pixel. I'll add a solid border, and I'll make it black just to make it vivid, and I'll save it. So you can see a border around, and let me make the border like 4 pixels so that it can be clearer. So our wall will be as thick as the walls of Jericho. So you can see that we have a border around our elements now, but there's no margin. We have padding, we have the content, we have border, but we don't have margin, and that's why the other elements are actually kind of sitting directly next to this h1 we are targeting now. So the other way we can do that is just by adding margin, and when we add margin, it is going to space it from every other element surrounding it. So we add a margin of 20 pixels as well, and see what that is. You see that it actually spaces it out, and it applies the margin to all the 4 edges. So you might decide you want to apply this box model, this padding. This style actually applies to all the 4 sides. You can say you want to apply the style to just one side or all 4 sides, depending on what you want. But know that the styling actually applies in a clockwise direction. So you have from the top to the right, then the bottom to the left. So what we do here is, for the padding, let's say we want to add different padding across the 4 sides of the element. So I will do a 20 pixels for the top. It starts from the top. Then for the I will do 5 pixels rather for left and right. When I add 2 values like this, it applies the first one to the vertical axis, applies the second one to the horizontal axis. See what happens. I see that the spacing here is smaller, but the one here is still our initial 20 pixels that we are applying. And we can even decide to apply 0 here, and that will remove the padding from the horizontal axis and leave the one on the vertical axis. But let's just make this 10 pixels. So let's now go further to add one more style, and this is going to apply to our bottom. Remember, it is top, right, bottom. So the next one we apply now will be applied to our bottom. So let's say at the bottom 130 pixels. Let me make it 80 pixels to make it more vivid. So this is going to apply to the bottom of the element. So you can see now that the bottom of the element has a wider and bigger margin, and padding rather, not margin. Then the next one will be applied, of course, to our left hand side. So let's say to the left hand side we want to add a 30 pixels margin, and that's that. So you can see now that we have one padding at the top, another one on the right hand side, then at the bottom we have a different one, then on the left hand side we have a different one. And you can't really see the one on the right hand side because the element is not spanning across the right hand side, but if I put the cursor over it, you can actually see that our padding on the right hand side is 30, on the left hand side is 10, at the bottom is 80, then at the top is 20. So you can do that same thing for your margin. You can apply this something similar to this on your margin. Copy and paste this. So I'll just copy and paste this, and it's always top, left, bottom, right. And if I decide to put just 3 values, it is going to take the one I have at the top and apply it to the bottom or automatically. But let me just leave the 4 ones. So you can see now that we have 80 pixels margin at the bottom, and that is this 80 pixels at the bottom, 10 pixels at the right, 20 at the top and 30 at the left. So you can see how that works now. But instead of doing this also, you can decide to do something like, and let me save this now, the margin will be out. You can decide to do something like margin top 10 pixels. You can decide to do margin left 20 pixels. You know, you can decide to write it without using this shorthand property here, and it is still going to apply it like that. So you can see we have margin at the top and we have margin on the left. Does that make sense to you guys?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that this is the CSS box model in a nutshell. Your content padding is displaced from the edge of the content to the content itself. Border is the edge of the content, and if you can decide not to actually draw a border, but the border will still be there. You can decide not to put a visible border, and it is still going to be there, but the border will always be there. This is the border is always there. In as much as we might decide to give it value or not give it value. I can also take out the margin and everything. If I take it out, it will be there, but that means we don't give it any value, but the potential is there. That is the box model. They are always available, regardless of what value you decide to give to them. You can give to them 0 value, you can give to them 100, or as much as possible. And let me just quickly talk about CSS units. CSS unit, this pixels is probably the most popular one and the first set of units you'll be using initially. Pixels is just to CSS what kilometer is to your driving. It is the unit of measurement. Do you get the point? And pixels pertain to each dot that makes up the picture on your computer screen. But that's by the way, we are not dealing with that in a very, very holistic approach. So I think I've been able to cover most of the things you should really know for you to be able to follow along with the classes now. So that will be all for now. I'm actually very tired. So if you have any question, please ask.
Yeah, please let me ask this. Sorry. Okay. Yesterday when we were on class, you actually class 2. You actually used two different class. Then you give a figure on it.
As in now,
You class to for example now, like this second header, right? When you want to open a tag on the CSS, you did the second header and the third header. You wrote it in a line before you open that bracket tag. You use a greater than sign. You added to. Okay. I don't know if you understand what.
Okay, yes, why I did that. Okay, and I think I have a div here. So I have a div here, that has an image inside of it. So I'm just going to remove this image with that I put here. So, and that's the idea of combining selectors in CSS. So you can see that our image is big now. So we have this div. So what I did yesterday was I just did something like that. I did div, which is the class name of that element, and I did like this, and I did img. Then that means we are talking about the image that is directly inside of a div. So any image that is directly inside of a div will have this style applied to them. So we can do a width of 200 like we did before, 200 pixels, and save it, and that style should come back. You get it? So this is an idea of what we call combined selectors. So there are different kind of combined selectors. So, and that has a higher precedence even to the ID. Yeah, when you combine selectors also. But that's fine. So that should be all. Is there any other question, please? And is it very clear enough now? Like you guys understand and have a good understanding of everything so far. And the class is recorded, so I'll share the links to you. So no other question. Then if there's no other question, let's just say good night to one another.
Sorry, what time are we?
Yeah, the phone.
Meeting tomorrow?
What time is what?
What time are we meeting tomorrow? Is there no?
Tomorrow, I'm not sure because currently based on my level of tiredness, but I think I've covered almost everything you need to know. Seriously, honestly. Yeah.
Yes.
So you might just have to watch this replay. Like this is the
Okay.
recap of everything. So you just watch this replay. It should be more than enough. Then if you have any question, personally, just ask me. But for tomorrow, I don't want to talk because tomorrow I have
Yeah.
Hello. So tomorrow.
Okay, so I want to ask a question.
Okay, I'm listening, sir.
Yeah, so that doc type, right?
Yeah.
When you type it, normally it brings up, the language, all that, meta, UA compatible, and then all the shebang, right? I noticed that with your own, after it brings it up, somehow it vanishes. What do you do? Do
No, I just collapsed it. I collapsed it. It didn't vanish. I can collapse my code like this. It's still there, but I just kind of reduced it. Do you understand?
Oh, okay.
I
Okay,
just
okay.
collapsed it.
Alright.
It's still there. Okay, so
But if you collapse that, your head will not be open anymore.
and the code is still in my document, but it's just for readability. I want to be able to read my code. That's why I sometimes collapse things like this so that I can see everything, see what I want to focus on.
Okay. Because what I was saying is, I understand the collapsing, but if you collapse, it's under the head, right?
Yeah,
You
it's not
collapse the
deleted
head.
now. It's still there.
Okay.
I just collapsed it. It's still there. I didn't delete it. It's just collapse that block so that I can see there. If not, I have to scroll a lot. I have to scroll more than. It's just something I normally do. Even for CSS as well, I can collapse a block like I can collapse the various blocks like this, and it doesn't change anything. It's not a modification to the code. It's just a user experience for Visual Studio Code.
Okay, I also used to have an issue of something like this. Sometimes whenever I put this lorem, it's just going to, that lorem is going to bring a lot of words. It's going to be very long, and I have to start dragging down to the left before I can click enter to go down to the next line.
Yeah, you mean this like lorem, and lorem is an automatic text generator by the way. So it goes to the next line. So I have an extension, this prettier extension, so that when I save, it automatically just breaks it for me.
Okay.
So
Okay, the extension, what it does,
it
it's
just
just working on that
automatically
lorem
indents the
itself.
code for me. It automatically arranges the code. So that's it. So
Sorry?
Huh?
Sorry, please come again. You said
it automatically
the
arranges the code. It arranges the code or indents the code for me. Like instead of me having to use tab to kind of shift things in and shift it out, it just once I press Ctrl Save and Ctrl S, it just indents it for me. You get. So that's the idea. So thank you guys. I think if there's no other question, good night. So I'm stopping this.